I still remember the chill of that morning, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes every sound sharper, every glance heavier. The church smelled of lilies, their sweet fragrance almost suffocating, and the air was thick with whispered condolences. People came in their best black coats, hats in hand, their faces wearing carefully constructed masks of grief. But beneath the polished veneer of mourning, I sensed something else: curiosity, expectation, perhaps even hunger. I sat in the front pew, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, but I didn't feel the pain. I was a widow now. My husband of 30 years lowered into the ground only days before. My heart was already broken, cracked in too many places to count. I thought nothing could hurt me more than losing him, but I was wrong. The lawyer's voice sliced through the silence like a blade, calm, practiced, rehearsed. He stood before the altar, papers in hand, and began to read my husband's will. My breath caught when I heard my sister's name, not once, not twice. Over and over again, as if the ink itself favored her. My sister Margaret sitting just a few pews behind me, her black veil trembling faintly as she lowered her head in a show of grief. While her lips curved ever so slightly in a smile, she thought no one noticed. Not a single word mentioned me. Not a single word about the house we had built together, the savings we had scraped and sacrificed for, the land that had been in his family for generations. All of it, every last piece of his legacy, was to go to my sister. The air in the church shifted. I heard gasps, then whispers, like the hissing of snakes in tall grass. She's not in it at all? Everything to the sister? After 30 years of marriage? Their words clawed at my skin, each one sharper than the last. I tried to keep my composure, my head bowed, but my heart was thundering so violently I feared it might burst. I glanced at Margaret. Her shoulders trembled as if she were crying, but I knew my sister better than anyone. That wasn't grief. That was triumph. I could almost hear her voice in my head. You always thought you were the stronger one. Look who he trusted in the end. The betrayal was a double-edged sword. Losing my husband was unbearable enough, but realizing that my own sister had been part of a secret I never saw coming, that was the wound that truly gutted me. I thought of all the nights we had shared stories as children, of the way I once trusted her with my secrets, my fears, my dreams. I thought of the times she smiled at me across the dinner table, telling me, "You're so lucky. He adores you." And now, standing in that church, I realized those words might have been barbs, subtle reminders of what she was already plotting. The lawyer's voice droned on, listing properties, bank accounts, stocks, and bonds, each word another brick in the wall that shut me out of my own life. People shifted in their seats, and though their eyes pretended to avoid me, I could feel their stares drilling holes into my back. Some pitied me, others judged me, and a few, I swear, enjoyed watching me unravel. My son leaned closer, whispering, "Mom, are you all right?" His voice trembled with shock. But how could I be all right? 30 years of loyalty, of sacrifices, of building a life side by side, and in the end, I wasn't even a footnote in his will. My name was erased, as if I had never existed. I wanted to scream, to stand up and demand an explanation from the coffin that held the man I thought I knew. But I sat still, frozen, because I could feel Margaret's gaze burning into me. She was daring me to break, daring me to cause a scene so she could cloak herself in more false sympathy. When the lawyer finished, silence fell heavy over the pews. The kind of silence that isn't peace but judgment, waiting to see who will speak first. My throat ached, my tongue heavy, but no words came. Instead, Margaret rose slowly, like a queen accepting her crown. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief and whispered, loud enough for those around to hear, "I'll honor his wishes. It's what he wanted." What he wanted. The phrase echoed inside me, acidic and cruel. Was this truly his decision, or had she wormed her way into his trust, poisoning his mind against me? I remembered the nights he came home late, the hushed phone calls I wasn't meant to hear, the way Margaret began visiting more often, bringing casseroles, staying longer than she should. I told myself I was paranoid. That family was family and she was only trying to help. But sitting there, stripped of everything, humiliated before friends and neighbors, I realized the truth. I hadn't just lost my husband. I had been played, betrayed, erased by the two people I thought I could always count on. I can still feel the weight of that church pressing down on me, the cold stone walls, the faces watching like vultures circling prey. My heart pounded in my ears, and I thought, if love, loyalty, and 30 years of marriage mean nothing in the end, what does? I walked out of the church on legs that barely carried me, the whispers following me like shadows. She got nothing. Her own sister, can you imagine? Maybe he didn't trust her. Each word was a dagger, but none cut deeper than Margaret's smile when she brushed past me, leaning close enough to whisper, "Don't fight it. You'll only embarrass yourself." That was the moment something inside me snapped. For years, I had lived as the devoted wife, the loyal sister, the woman who carried burdens without complaint. But humiliation has a way of forging steel out of broken hearts, and though I didn't show it then, I made myself a silent promise. I would uncover the truth no matter how deep it was buried. Later that night, as I sat alone in my darkened living room, the clock ticking like a relentless reminder of everything I had lost, I stared at the empty seat where my husband used to read his newspaper. I whispered into the silence, "Why did you do this to me? Was I never enough?" Tears burned my eyes, but even through the blur, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. On the mantel, among the framed photographs and dusty trinkets, sat the old music box he had given me on our 10th anniversary. A gift I had forgotten, its melody long silent. I don't know why, but I opened it. And when I did, a folded envelope slid out, hidden beneath the velvet lining. My hands shook as I picked it up. My heart raced. Was this just another cruel reminder? Another letter confessing his love for my sister? Or was it something else entirely? I didn't open it that night. I didn't have the strength, but I knew then that the story wasn't over. What they thought was the end of me was only the beginning. And if Margaret believed she had won, she was about to learn that some victories are nothing but traps waiting to snap shut. So I ask you, if you were in my place, betrayed by the man you loved and the sister you trusted most, what would you do? Would you accept defeat, fade into the shadows of humiliation? Or would you dig, claw, and fight until the truth was dragged into the light? Because I made my choice that night. And that envelope in the music box, it was the spark that would burn their carefully built lies to ash. The first crack in the perfect picture came weeks before the funeral, though I didn't see it for what it was at the time. I used to tell myself that every marriage has secrets, that sometimes silence is kinder than the truth. But when silence starts to weigh more than words, it turns into suspicion. And that's exactly what happened to me. It began with phone calls. My husband used to leave his cell phone on the kitchen counter, face up, never locked, as if he had nothing to hide. But in the last year of his life, he began to take calls in the garage, the backyard, even in the car with the doors shut. His voice lowered to a whisper, the kind of tone you use when you don't want anyone else to know what's being said. One night, I asked him, "Who keeps calling so late?" He smiled that tired smile of his and said, "Work, you know how it is." But I knew it wasn't work. He had retired 2 years ago. What job calls at midnight when you're supposed to be enjoying the quiet of old age? I didn't press him then, because after 3 decades of marriage, I had learned that asking too many questions only built thicker walls. Then Margaret started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful. I thought she was being supportive, helping us through the stress of his failing health. She brought casseroles, pies, soups, the kind of food that fills the house with warmth. But every time she came, she stayed longer. Her laughter echoed too loudly in our living room. Her eyes lingered too long on him. And I noticed something else. Whenever I walked into the room, conversations stopped. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and found the two of them huddled close together, a piece of paper spread across the counter. They straightened up quickly, my husband folding the paper so fast it nearly tore. Margaret's smile was too wide, too rehearsed. "We were just talking about the garden," she said. But there were no flowers on that paper, no soil or seeds. I caught a glimpse of a lawyer's letterhead before he shoved it into his pocket. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was imagining shadows where there was only light. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once it takes root, it grows in silence, spreading like ivy through the walls of your heart. That night I lay awake listening to the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Its steady beat felt like an accusation, each chime a reminder that I was losing him to secrets I wasn't meant to know. I thought of Margaret's hand resting on his arm earlier that day, the way she leaned in as though they shared something sacred. I thought of the way he looked at her, not with desire, not exactly, but with trust, a trust that used to belong to me. Weeks later, just after breakfast, I found him sitting at the dining table, his face pale, papers spread out before him. When I entered, he quickly gathered them, stuffing them into a folder. I asked him if everything was all right. He said yes, just some financial matters, nothing for me to worry about. But I saw the initials MS scribbled in the corner of one page. Margaret's name was Margaret Stone. I should have confronted him then, demanded answers. But my voice betrayed me. Fear kept me quiet. Fear of hearing a truth that might shatter everything we had built. After he passed, those fragments of memory came back sharper, cutting into me as I replayed them in the quiet of the nights. The way he avoided my eyes when Margaret entered the room. The quick glances they shared, so subtle I dismissed them as coincidence. The whispered phone calls in the garage. They were all signs, breadcrumbs I should have followed sooner. And then there was the night he came home later than usual, smelling faintly of cologne he hadn't worn in years. His hair was damp, as if he had showered somewhere else. I asked him where he had been, and he said he had driven Margaret home after a family dinner. The way he said her name made me shiver. Casual. Familiar. Too familiar. I told myself it was paranoia. That grief from his declining health was making me see monsters in shadows. But now, with the will read out loud in front of everyone, I knew it hadn't been paranoia at all. It had been truth, hiding in plain sight. After the funeral service, when everyone else had left and the church was nearly empty, I lingered in the pews, staring at the stained glass windows. Margaret walked over, her heels clicking against the stone floor. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is hard for you," she said softly, "but he trusted me. He knew I would take care of everything." Her words burned. Take care of everything, as if I hadn't spent 30 years taking care of him, of us, of the life we built. I pulled away from her touch, but she only smiled, that same sly curve of lips I had seen at the reading. "Don't fight it, sister. It's what he wanted." That night, alone in my room, I dug through the drawers of his old desk, searching for anything that could explain what had happened. Receipts, scraps of paper, even old notes. Most of it was ordinary, but then I found it. A folded napkin with handwriting scrawled across it. It wasn't his. It was Margaret's. "Don't forget to sign. Call me if she asks questions." My blood ran cold. The napkin smelled faintly of his cologne, the same scent I had noticed on him that night. I held it to my nose, trembling, and realized that every suspicion I had buried was true. She hadn't just been a sister helping in times of need. She had been there, weaving herself into the cracks of our marriage, twisting his trust until it pointed away from me. I remember gripping the napkin so tightly it nearly tore. I wanted to run to her house that instant to throw it in her face and demand answers. But something stopped me. A voice inside whispered, "Wait, watch, let her believe she's won." Because sometimes silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is a blade you sharpen in the dark. So I stayed quiet. I put the napkin back into the drawer, my heart pounding, my breath shallow. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was real, tangible, written in her own hand. And yet, when I closed my eyes that night, another memory surfaced, a childhood memory, long buried. Margaret and I, no more than 10 years old, playing in our grandmother's garden. We promised each other that no matter what happened, we would always protect one another. She had looked me in the eye, her small hand gripping mine, and said, "Sisters forever." That memory hurt more than the napkin in my drawer, because it reminded me that betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those who know exactly where to strike. And so, as the clock ticked into the early hours of morning, I realized the first truth in a storm of lies. My husband hadn't been the only one I lost. I had lost my sister long before the will was ever written. The whispers didn't stop at the funeral. They followed me into the grocery store, the bakery, even the post office. People's eyes carried questions they were too polite to ask, but their silence was heavier than words. I became the widow who had been erased, the woman whose husband had trusted her sister more than her. And every time I felt those stares, I thought of Margaret's smile, that quiet satisfaction of someone who had outplayed me. It was a week after the funeral when the first real crack widened. I was at the market buying bread when a woman I hadn't seen in years touched my arm. Her name was Eleanor, a childhood friend who had moved away but returned recently. She leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm so sorry about your husband, but there's something you should know. I saw Margaret with him at the law office last spring. They went in together. I thought it was odd, but now, after hearing the will, it makes sense." Her words struck me harder than any slap. A law office? Together? My stomach twisted. Eleanor's eyes darted around before she added. They were carrying a folder. He looked pale. She looked determined, like she was in charge. I forced a smile, thanked her, and walked away. But my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the bag of bread. The image played in my mind. My husband, frail and vulnerable, sitting across from Margaret in some polished office, signing away everything we had built while she guided his hand. That night, I confronted Margaret, though not directly. I called her under the pretense of checking in. Her voice was sweet, honeyed, as she asked if I was eating well, if I needed company. But when I mentioned Eleanor's sighting at the law office, her tone shifted ever so slightly. "Oh, that. Yes, I took him to update some papers. He was confused about the process. You know how men are with details." Her laugh was light, but it felt rehearsed. She added quickly, "He didn't want to burden you. He told me he trusted me to handle things." Burden. The word stabbed me, as if I, his wife, his partner of 30 years, was a weight he couldn't carry. I bit my tongue, forcing civility into my voice, but when I hung up the phone, my hand trembled with rage. The following days brought more whispers, not from strangers this time, but from within my own family. My nephew, Margaret's son, stopped by to drop off a casserole. He avoided my eyes, fidgeting as he placed it on the counter. Finally, he muttered, "Mom said you're upset about the will. She said Uncle wanted her to take care of everything, that you're too emotional right now to understand." Too emotional. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. It wasn't just Margaret twisting the story. She was spreading it, planting seeds in the minds of others. She was crafting a narrative where I was the fragile, unstable widow, and she, the responsible caretaker. One evening, I overheard my own daughter on the phone. She whispered, thinking I couldn't hear, "I don't know. Mom seems paranoid." Aunt Margaret says Dad trusted her more. Maybe we should just let it go. My knees buckled as I pressed my back to the hallway wall, listening to my daughter doubt me. My own child poisoned against me by the sister I once held as my closest confidant. It felt like the walls of my home were closing in, suffocating me with their silence and betrayal. I withdrew, sinking deeper into myself, but the memories kept clawing back. Flashbacks struck me at random, Margaret's voice on Christmas Eve, gently insisting, "You should let me handle the finances, you've always been so busy with the house," or the time she showed up unannounced with documents in hand, urging him to sign something just in case. At the time, I brushed it off as her being meddlesome, the way sisters sometimes are. But now, strung together, those moments painted a darker picture. She hadn't just been helping. She had been planning, weaving her way into his trust while pushing me further out. The loneliness grew unbearable. At church, people's eyes lingered on me, then shifted quickly away, as if they didn't want to be associated with the woman who had lost not only her husband but her dignity. Neighbors stopped inviting me to gatherings, and every time I passed Margaret's house, I saw lights burning late into the night, shadows moving behind the curtains. I wondered if she sat at her table, sipping wine, reveling in her victory. But then, one evening, an unexpected ally appeared. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, knocked on my door. She shuffled in with her cane, her sharp eyes peering into mine. "I don't trust your sister," she said bluntly. "Do you know how many times I saw her leaving your husband's car in the middle of the afternoon? Not once, not twice, but often. Always when you weren't home." Her words made my heart race. Margaret driving his car? My husband never let anyone touch that car, not even me. Yet Margaret had been behind the wheel, slipping in and out of my life like a thief in the night. Mrs. Henderson gripped my hand, her voice lowering. "Don't let her fool you. She's clever, but I've lived long enough to know the scent of greed, and your sister smells of it." Her support was a small ember in the darkness, but it burned brightly. For the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Someone else saw it too. Someone else believed me. Still, the pressure mounted. At a family dinner, I tried to speak up, to remind my children that I had been by their father's side for decades, that I knew him better than anyone. But Margaret, sitting at the head of the table as if she had always belonged there, silenced me with a gentle hand on my arm. "Please don't upset the children. This isn't the time for conflict." The room went quiet. My daughter shifted uncomfortably. My son avoided my gaze. In that moment, I realized Margaret had taken not just my husband's legacy, but my voice. She controlled the narrative, the conversation, the perception of who I was. And the more I tried to fight, the weaker I appeared in their eyes. That night, alone in my bedroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked older, worn, tired. But beneath the grief, I saw something else flickering in my eyes. Rage, determination, a refusal to be erased. I remembered the envelope hidden in the music box, still unopened. My hands trembled as I reached for it, but again I hesitated. Not yet, because part of me feared it might confirm Margaret's victory, that maybe my husband had truly chosen her, that my life had been nothing but a lie. So I waited, watching, listening. And the more I watched, the more I saw. Margaret's confidence grew bolder. She spoke of selling the house, of moving accounts, of streamlining the family assets. She behaved as though the inheritance was already sealed, as if I no longer existed. But deep down, I knew something she didn't. Secrets leave traces, no matter how carefully hidden. And my sister had left more than one. The napkin in my drawer, the witnesses who saw them together at the law office, the neighbor who watched her driving his car. Each piece was small, but together they began to form a pattern, a story she hadn't intended to tell. And while she believed she was tightening her grip on everything, she was really tightening a noose, one that, in time, would be her undoing. If round one was the spark of suspicion, and round two was the widening circle of whispers, then round three was the storm. This was when the betrayal no longer hid in corners or behind polite smiles. This was when I felt the walls close in, pressing me into a corner until I could barely breathe. It began with a dinner at my daughter's house. She invited me kindly enough, but I sensed hesitation in her voice, as if the invitation was a duty rather than affection. When I arrived, Margaret was already there, sitting at the head of the table like she belonged. My daughter greeted her with warmth, while her hug for me was fleeting, distracted. I sat down, my stomach heavy with dread. The meal unfolded with conversation I could barely follow. Margaret spoke of selling the farmland, investing the money in new ventures, perhaps even buying a vacation home for family gatherings. My daughter nodded, my son-in-law chimed in with enthusiasm, and I sat silent, listening to them plan a future that no longer included me. When I finally spoke, reminding them that the farm had been in our family for 3 generations, the room fell silent. Margaret placed her hand gently over mine, her eyes glistening with counterfeit sympathy. "We know it's hard for you, dear, but you must admit, you're not in the best state to manage these things. Your husband trusted me to handle it, for everyone's sake." The words stabbed deep. For everyone's sake, as if my existence was now an obstacle, my grief an inconvenience. My daughter lowered her eyes, and my son-in-law cleared his throat awkwardly, but no one defended me. I was outnumbered at my own family's table. I excused myself early, and as I walked to my car, I heard Margaret's voice drifting through the window. "She'll come around eventually. She has no choice." That night, I cried for hours, not for my husband or even for the stolen inheritance, but for the realization that my children were slipping away from me. Margaret wasn't just taking money or land. She was taking my family, rewriting the script of who I was in their eyes. The next blow came from the community. At church, where I once found solace, the whispers turned into pitying smiles. A woman I had known for years leaned close after service and whispered, "Don't worry, dear. Margaret will take care of you. That's what your husband wanted." My face burned as I forced a smile, my heart thudding painfully in my chest. I wanted to scream, "I don't need her to take care of me. I am not a child." But instead, I swallowed the words, my silence feeding their perception of weakness. Even my son, my strong, dependable boy, began to change. He called less often, and when he did, his voice carried a rehearsed patience. "Mom, maybe Aunt Margaret is right. Maybe it's better if she handles the estate. It's a lot for you right now." I bit my lip until it bled, listening to my own child echo her words, words she had planted like poison in fertile soil. Everywhere I turned, I was being erased. The bakery I used to frequent with my husband, our little ritual every Saturday morning, now felt hostile. The owner, who had once greeted me with warmth, hesitated before speaking, as if unsure which side to stand on. "Margaret stopped by yesterday," she said casually. "She mentioned you might be moving out soon. That true?" My throat closed and I shook my head, but the damage was done. Margaret's narrative had spread like wildfire. The pressure built inside me like a kettle on the stove, whistling louder and louder. Nights were the worst. I lay awake replaying memories, searching for where it all began. I remembered the day my husband and I planted roses in the backyard. Margaret had been there, laughing as she teased him about digging too shallow. I remembered how easily she fit into our lives, how natural it seemed for her to be part of everything. But now, those memories were tainted, each one recast as evidence of betrayal. One night, unable to bear the silence, I dug through the desk drawers again, searching for something, anything that might explain. I found an old receipt from a steakhouse in the city, dated months before his death. The name on the reservation, my husband's. The companion listed Monsieur Stone, Margaret's name. My hands trembled as I held the paper. He had taken her to dinner, an expensive dinner we hadn't indulged in for years. Candlelight, wine, laughter, all the things that used to be ours. I pressed the receipt to my chest and let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft of intimacy, of memory, of history that belonged to me. The isolation grew unbearable. My friends stopped calling, uncertain how to navigate the scandal. My family doubted me. My community pitied me. And Margaret stood taller each day, her voice growing stronger, her presence more commanding. I felt like a ghost in my own life, watching helplessly as she painted me as weak, unstable, irrelevant. The breaking point came at a family gathering organized by Margaret herself. She invited everyone, nieces, nephews, cousins, under the guise of honoring my husband's memory. I arrived reluctantly, only to find myself seated at the far end of the table, while Margaret presided at the center like a matriarch. She raised a glass and spoke of my husband's wishes, her voice steady, authoritative, as she outlined plans for the estate. When I protested, reminding them that I had shared a life with him for 30 years, Margaret's smile didn't falter. She simply tilted her head and said softly, "Sister, grief makes us imagine things. You must accept reality." The room nodded in agreement. Their eyes filled with pity for me, not for her. I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down, suffocating me. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I excused myself, my hands shaking as I gripped the table for support. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. My face was pale, my eyes red, but behind the grief, I saw something else, a glimmer of defiance. Margaret thought she had silenced me, but in truth, she had only pushed me closer to the edge, and when a person has nothing left to lose, that's when they become most dangerous. Later that night, I sat alone in my living room. The envelope from the music box in my lap, my fingers traced its edges, my heart pounding. I hadn't opened it yet, afraid of what it might reveal, but after everything, after the whispers, the receipts, the pity, I knew I couldn't delay forever. The truth, no matter how painful, was better than the suffocating silence. Still, I hesitated. I thought of my children, of how they looked at me now with doubt instead of love. I thought of my community whispering behind my back. I thought of Margaret standing tall at the head of the table, her victory nearly complete. And I asked myself, if I open this envelope and it confirms my worst fears, will I survive it? Or will it destroy what little strength I have left? I placed it back in the drawer, unresolved, but I made a silent vow. Whatever the truth was, I would uncover it. I would not let her rewrite the story of my life. And though I didn't know it yet, the storm that had nearly broken me was also sharpening me. Every whisper, every slight, every betrayal was forging me into something stronger. Margaret thought she had won, but she hadn't seen the fire she was kindling inside me, a fire that would soon burn through every lie she had built. I thought I had endured the worst. I thought the whispers, the pity, the family dinners where my voice was drowned out were the cruelest cuts Margaret could deliver. But I was wrong. The cruelest part was still waiting, hidden in a stack of papers, waiting for me to sign away, not only my home, but my very existence. It happened one gray afternoon, the kind of day when the clouds hang low and everything feels heavier than it should. I was in my kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold when a knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to find a courier holding a thick envelope. He handed it to me with a polite nod. No idea that inside lay the weight of my undoing. I tore it open at the table, my hands trembling. The letterhead was from the same law office Eleanor had mentioned. Inside were documents titled Transfer of Ownership and Consent Agreement. My eyes blurred as I read the lines. The house, the farmland, the savings accounts, all of it was being consolidated under Margaret's name. And at the bottom of the last page was a space for my signature. A note clipped to the front read, "As per your late husband's wishes, please sign to finalize. Margaret will assist you with the details." I felt the room tilt, my breath shallow. They wanted me to make it official, to hand over everything willingly. A part of me wanted to crumple the papers and throw them into the fire, but another part, the part beaten down by weeks of isolation and humiliation, whispered that maybe this was inevitable, maybe fighting was pointless. That evening, Margaret came by. She entered without knocking, her perfume trailing through the hallway like a warning. She saw the documents on the table and smiled faintly. "Good, you've received them." I clenched my fists, my voice barely steady. "You expect me to sign this?" She tilted her head, her expression soft, almost maternal. "It's what he wanted, dear. You know that. Don't make this harder on yourself. If you sign, we can avoid messy disputes. The family will respect you for your grace." Grace. That word made me want to scream. What grace was there in surrender? What dignity in being erased? Still, I felt the weakness pressing in, the exhaustion of fighting a battle where everyone believed her and no one believed me. My children had stopped calling as often. Friends avoided me. The community had chosen their narrative. Alone, I wondered if signing might at least end the torment. That night, I sat at the table with a pen in hand, the papers before me. My tears blurred the ink. My husband's name stared back at me from the pages, his signature shaky, uneven. I traced it with my finger, remembering the strength it once carried. Was this truly his will, or had Margaret guided his hand, whispering promises while I remained in the dark? The clock ticked, each second a drumbeat in my chest. I lifted the pen, hovering over the signature line. My hand shook so violently that ink dotted the page. And then I froze. Something about his signature didn't look right. I had seen it 1,000 times over the years, on birthday cards, on checks, on love notes he used to leave on the kitchen counter. This one was different. The loops were uneven, the letters cramped, as though written by a trembling hand not entirely his own. A wave of nausea hit me. Had she forged it? Or had she pressured him when he was too weak to resist? My stomach twisted at the thought. I dropped the pen and shoved the papers away, gasping for breath. The next morning, Margaret returned, this time with my daughter. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the documents neatly stacked between us. My daughter's eyes were sad, but firm. "Mom, maybe it's better this way. Dad trusted Aunt Margaret. We should respect that." I looked at her. My own flesh and blood, repeating Margaret's words like scripture. I wanted to shout, to beg her to see the manipulation, but the words caught in my throat. Margaret's hand rested on the stack of papers, her nails tapping softly against the table. "All it takes is your signature," she said smoothly. "Then you'll be free of all this stress." Free. That was the lie she dangled in front of me, but I knew freedom didn't come from surrender. Freedom came from truth. When they left, I collapsed into the chair, my body trembling. I thought of calling the lawyer directly, of demanding answers, but fear held me back. What if the will was real? What if my husband truly had chosen her over me? Could I survive hearing it confirmed by a stranger? I buried my face in my hands, sobbing until the room blurred. For a moment, I truly believed I had lost everything. My husband, my children's trust, my community's respect. My sister had stolen it all, and I was powerless to stop her. And then, as if fate itself intervened, my gaze fell on the old music box on the mantel. The envelope was still inside, unopened, waiting. I rose slowly, my legs weak, and retrieved it. My fingers trembled as I slid it out, the paper yellowed, the edges worn. I sat at the table, staring at it as if it were a living thing. With a deep breath, I tore it open. Inside was a folded letter in my husband's handwriting. My heart raced as I read. "My dearest, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I know you better than anyone, and I know you will search for answers. There are people who will try to twist my words, to claim what is not theirs. But I want you to know the truth. My heart, my life, and everything I built belongs to you. Only you. The enclosed copy of my will reflects this. Keep it safe. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I pulled out the second sheet. It was a copy of another will, signed, dated, notarized, and this time every line left the estate to me, my name, my rights, my place. I clutched the paper to my chest, sobbing with relief and rage all at once. He had trusted me. He had seen through her. He had left me the legacy we built together. But then a cold realization struck me. If this was the true will, then the one read at the funeral was a lie, a fabrication, and Margaret had orchestrated it. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the second will spread before me, my husband's true words burning into my soul. The despair that had nearly consumed me transformed into something else, a spark, a fire. Margaret thought she had broken me, that I would sign away everything in defeat, but she didn't know I held the one weapon that could destroy her. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness, listening to the creak of the house around me. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive, my mind racing with possibilities. The storm had pushed me to the edge, but instead of falling, I had found the strength to stand. When dawn broke, I looked at my reflection in the window. My eyes were swollen from crying. My face lined with exhaustion, but in those eyes burned determination. I whispered into the morning light, "You will not erase me. Not now. Not ever." The papers Margaret had sent still sat on the table, unsigned. Beside them, I placed the true will, a silent declaration of war. The battle was no longer about grief or dignity. It was about survival, and I was ready to fight. The morning after I discovered the second will, the world looked different. The sun streamed through the curtains as if it had been waiting for me to open my eyes, daring me to rise. For weeks I had stumbled through grief like a woman half dead, smothered by whispers and lies. But now, with my husband's true words pressed to my chest, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Certainty. It was a strange, dangerous certainty. The kind that comes when you've been pushed so far into the shadows that the only way forward is toward the light. I sat at the kitchen table, the false documents Margaret had sent me stacked neatly on one side, and the real will glowing in the pale light of dawn on the other. Two worlds, two stories, only one could survive. My hands trembled as I poured myself coffee. I spoke aloud as if confessing to the walls. I'm not signing her lies. Not now, not ever. The words steadied me, like armor sliding into place. But armor alone doesn't win a war. I needed allies. I needed proof stronger than just my word, because Margaret had already poisoned the ears of my family and the community. I thought of Eleanor, of Mrs. Henderson, of the scraps of evidence I had hidden, the napkin, the receipt, the whispers from neighbors. Individually, they were small, easy to dismiss. But together, with the real will in my hand, they became a storm waiting to strike. That evening, I called Eleanor. My voice shook, but my resolve didn't. You said you saw them at the law office. Would you be willing to say that publicly, if it came to it? There was a long pause on the line. Finally, Eleanor sighed. I don't want to be dragged into family business, but if she tries to contest you, I'll speak. I saw what I saw. It wasn't the fiery loyalty I craved, but it was enough. One ember to feed the flame. Next, I visited Mrs. Henderson. She opened the door slowly, leaning on her cane, her sharp eyes scanning my face. When I told her about the forged will and the letter my husband had left me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I knew it," she muttered. "I've seen too much greed in my time to mistake it. I'll stand with you, whatever you need." Her words were a balm, but also a warning, because I knew standing against Margaret meant drawing battle lines that could never be erased. That night, I spread everything across my table: the false transfer papers, the forged will, the napkin with her handwriting, the receipt from the steakhouse, and finally, the true will, signed and notarized, my name written in ink that could not be denied. Looking at it all, I realized Margaret had built her scheme on the assumption that I was weak, that grief would silence me, that humiliation would chain me. She thought I would crumble quietly while she took everything. But grief is not silence. It's a scream waiting for its moment. I whispered to myself, "She thinks she won, but she has no idea what's coming." The next day, Margaret appeared at my doorstep again, as if she could smell my defiance. She smiled, stepping into the house uninvited, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She gestured to the unsigned papers on the counter. "Still haven't signed? You're only making things harder." I looked her straight in the eye for the first time since the funeral. "I'm not signing, ever." Her smile faltered for the briefest moment before returning. "Don't be foolish. Everyone knows what he wanted. You'll only embarrass yourself dragging this out." I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was sharp enough to cut. "What he wanted is not what you told them. I have proof. And when I'm done, everyone will know the truth." For the first time, I saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes. It was quick, buried under layers of practiced confidence, but it was there, and it told me I was no longer the powerless widow she thought I was. I was her threat. When she left, slamming the door harder than she meant to, I stood alone in my kitchen, my breath steady, my heart pounding with purpose. The victim was gone. The hunt had begun. I knew this was only the beginning. I would need to be patient, to gather more than scraps, to prepare for the moment when her lies would collapse under their own weight. But I was no longer afraid of waiting, because waiting with proof is not weakness, it is strategy. I tucked the true will back into the music box, locking it like a soldier, hiding a weapon before battle. I stacked the false documents in a drawer, reminders of the lies I would soon expose, and then I stood by the window, watching the street grow dark, whispering to the night. She doesn't know it yet, but the storm is already here. It was raining the night I finally decided to confront her. Not a soft rain, but a storm, the kind that makes the trees bend and the windows rattle. The world itself seemed restless, impatient, as if it too wanted the truth dragged into the light. Margaret had invited me to her house to talk things through. She made it sound like a peace offering, but I knew better. Every invitation from her was a trap dressed in kindness. Still, I went. Not as a lamb to slaughter, but as a wolf finally baring its teeth. Her house was warm and bright, laughter echoing from a television in the other room. She led me into the kitchen. That same kitchen where we once baked cookies as children, side by side, whispering secrets and sharing dreams. But now it felt foreign, hostile. She poured 2 glasses of wine, sliding one toward me. I didn't touch it. "So," she said, settling into a chair opposite me, "have you come to your senses? Ready to sign?" I looked at her, really looked at her, the sister I had loved for so long. Her hair was perfectly styled, her nails polished, her lips curved in that smug little smile she thought I hadn't noticed before. "No," I said simply, "I'll never sign. And you know why? Because he never left it to you." "I found the real will." Her smile froze. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw her facade crack. It was small, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it was enough. She leaned back slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table between us. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. He left everything to me. Not you. You lied, you forged, and now everyone will know. The storm outside roared louder, rain pelting the windows like fists. Margaret's hand hovered over the envelope, then pulled back. She let out a laugh, high and brittle. "Do you think anyone will believe you? After everything? After I've shown them who you are?" I leaned forward, my voice low, sharp. "Yes, because I have proof. Proof of your handwriting on that napkin. Proof you went with him to the law office. Proof you drove his car when you thought no one was watching. And now, the real will. You built your story on lies, Margaret, and lies don't last." Her face flushed red, her composure unraveling. She slammed her glass on the table, wine spilling across the wood. "You were always the favorite," she hissed. "The perfect wife, the perfect little homemaker. He never saw you for what you were. Weak, naive, blind. I had to step in. I had to take control before everything fell apart." Her words cut, but they also revealed the truth. This wasn't about love for my husband or even about loyalty. This was about power, about envy that had simmered for years until it boiled over. I rose from my chair, my hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. "You didn't step in to save him. You stepped in to erase me, but you underestimated me, Margaret. You thought grief would silence me. You thought humiliation would break me, but all you've done is wake me up." She stood too, her face inches from mine, her breath hot with anger. "If you show them that will, I'll deny everything. I'll say you forged it. They'll believe me. They always do." I smiled then, a smile she didn't expect. "Not this time, because I'm not alone anymore. People saw you. People know. And when I show them the truth, your lies will crumble like ash." For a long moment we stood there, two sisters face to face, bound by blood but divided by betrayal. The storm outside raged, thunder shaking the walls, lightning flashing across her face. And in that flash I saw not the sister I grew up with, but a stranger who had worn my sister's skin, stolen her voice, and turned it into a weapon against me. Finally she stepped back, her voice trembling. "You'll regret this." "No," I said, my voice steady. "The only one who will regret anything is you." I picked up the envelope, tucked it back into my bag, and turned to leave. Behind me, I heard her glass shatter against the wall, the shards scattering across the floor like broken promises. As I stepped into the storm, the rain soaking me to the bone, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Freedom. For the first time since his death, I wasn't the widow erased by whispers. I was the woman holding the truth, and the truth was a weapon. Walking home in the rain, I whispered to myself, "The private battle is over. The public war begins." The rain had passed by morning, leaving the streets slick and shining, as if the whole town had been washed clean. But I wasn't clean. I was raw, my nerves sharp, my heart pounding with purpose. The private confrontation with Margaret had ended, but I knew it was only the first round. Now came the moment that would strip away every mask she wore. The lawyer had called a meeting for the final confirmation of the estate. Margaret had orchestrated it, of course, inviting my children, our extended family, even a few neighbors under the guise of transparency. She thought she was staging her coronation, her moment to stand above me once and for all. What she didn't know was that I was bringing the one thing she couldn't silence, the truth. I arrived at the law office early, the true will tucked safely in my bag, every scrap of evidence organized and ready. My palms were damp, my stomach twisted with nerves, but my resolve was unshakable. For too long, I had been the grieving widow, the silenced wife, the erased partner. Today, that ended. The conference room was large, with a long, polished table and tall windows that let the sunlight spill across the floor. People were already gathered when I walked in. My daughter, her eyes clouded with doubt. My son, fidgeting with his tie. Cousins, aunts, Neighbors. Faces that had watched me fall silent these past weeks. Faces that had pitied me, but never defended me. And at the head of the table sat Margaret, her black suit crisp, her smile serene, her hands folded neatly as if she already held the crown. She rose when she saw me, her voice warm and false. "Sister, I'm glad you came. This will bring closure to all of us." Closure. The word dripped from her tongue like poison. I took my seat without replying, my bag resting on my lap, the weight of the envelope grounding me. The lawyer cleared his throat, shuffling papers. "We are here to finalize the distribution of Mr. Stone's estate as per his will, which names his sister-in-law, Margaret Stone, as primary beneficiary." There was a murmur of approval around the table. I saw my daughter's shoulders relax, as if relieved this nightmare was almost over. Margaret's smile deepened. She leaned back in her chair, the queen in her castle. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. "That is not his will." The room froze. All eyes turned to me. My voice was steady, stronger than I felt inside. "The document you read at the funeral was false. I have the true will, the one he left for me. And I intend to show it to everyone here." Gasps rippled through the room. Margaret's smile faltered, but only for a second. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Sister, grief makes us imagine things. Please don't embarrass yourself." But I didn't falter. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it to the lawyer. His brows furrowed as he opened it, pulling out the notarized pages. The silence was thick as he read, his eyes scanning every line. Finally, he looked up, his voice firm. This will names his wife as sole beneficiary. It is dated and notarized. This appears to be the valid document." The room erupted. Voices rose in shock, whispers sharp as knives. "What?" But she said, "How is that possible?" My children looked at each other, confusion etched on their faces. Margaret slammed her hand on the table, her voice rising. "That's a forgery! She's desperate and she's trying to steal what doesn't belong to her." I stood, my hands shaking, but my voice unyielding. "Forgery? Then explain this." I pulled out the napkin with her handwriting, the receipt from the steakhouse, the testimonies I had gathered. I laid them out one by one, the pieces of her lies stacking higher until they towered over her composure. "You schemed with him at law offices. You drove his car behind my back. You wrote notes about signing papers. You poisoned this family with lies. And now the truth is here, Margaret. You can't erase me anymore." The lawyer examined the documents, his frown deepening. These raise serious questions. If this will is valid, the previous one is null. And if forgery is involved... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Margaret's face twisted, the mask finally cracking. She stood, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You don't deserve any of it. You wasted his life with your small dreams, your little routines. He came to me because I understood him, because I gave him what you couldn't." Her words echoed through the room, raw and venomous. Gasps filled the air. My daughter covered her mouth. My son's face paled. The neighbors exchanged glances, whispers rising like a tide. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked her in the eye and said, "No, Margaret. He came to me because I was his wife, his partner, his family. You were never more than a shadow at the edge of our life, and now everyone sees it." The silence that followed was crushing. Margaret's chest heaved, her hands trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. The faces that once pitied me now turned cold toward her. Finally, my son stood, his voice breaking. "Aunt Margaret, did you really do this?" Her eyes flickered with desperation. "Daniel, But he shook his head, his voice firm. "Don't. We believed you. We doubted our own mother because of you. And now I see what you are." Tears welled in my eyes, but I held them back. This wasn't a moment for weakness. This was victory, raw and painful, but mine. The lawyer cleared his throat again, his voice final. Until further investigation, the estate remains with Mrs. Stone as per this valid will. Any attempt to contest it will be handled in court, where these documents will serve as evidence. The room buzzed with whispers, but Margaret's voice was silent now. She slumped into her chair, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. I gathered the documents, placing them back into the envelope. My hands no longer trembled. I looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. This is my life, my marriage, my legacy. I will not let anyone erase me again. When I walked out of that room, the whispers followed me. But they were different this time. Not pity, not doubt, but respect. Fear, even. Because they had seen the truth laid bare, and they knew the story had changed forever. As I stepped into the sunlight, the air fresh and clean after the storm, I whispered to myself, "It's over. The lies are finished." But deep down, I knew it wasn't truly over. Not yet. Because the aftermath of this confrontation would ripple through every corner of my family, my community, and Margaret's carefully built world. And I was ready to face it all. Truth is a strange thing. When it first comes out, people whisper. Then they argue. Then, like wildfire, it spreads faster than anyone can contain. That's what happened after the confrontation at the lawyer's office. What began as a family matter became the talk of the entire community, every corner buzzing with pieces of the story, each person adding their own detail, their own outrage. By the next morning, neighbors were already at my door. Mrs. Henderson was the first. She leaned on her cane, her sharp eyes gleaming with vindication. "I knew she was rotten," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air. "I told you, didn't I? And now everyone else knows, too." She looked me in the eye, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "Don't you worry, dear. You've got people standing with you now." Word of the real will traveled faster than I expected. By the time I went to the bakery that afternoon, whispers hushed as soon as I walked in, but they weren't pitying anymore. They were electric. A woman in line leaned toward me and whispered, "I can't believe your own sister would do that. Shameful." Another customer added, "We're all with you. What she tried to pull, unforgivable." Even the cashier, who had avoided my eyes for weeks, looked at me with newfound respect. "You showed real strength," she said softly as she handed me my change. "Not many could face down their own blood like that." At church the following Sunday, the whispers were louder, no longer hidden. People pointed openly, not at me this time, but at Margaret. She still came, dressed in her finest, trying to hold her head high. But the stares cut her down. Women she once gossiped with turned their backs. Men who had nodded politely now shook their heads in disgust. The choir sang as always, but the notes felt sharper, each one an accusation. When the service ended, Mrs. Peterson, a respected elder of the congregation, stood in front of everyone and said, "We all saw what happened. We all know the truth now. A sister who schemes against her own blood, that's not family. That's betrayal." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret fled the church, her heels clicking against the stone floor like a retreating drumbeat. But it wasn't only the church. The fire spread to every corner of town. At the market, at the post office, at the small diner by the square, people whispered Margaret's name with disgust. She forged papers. She tried to steal her own sister's home. Can you imagine? The story grew with every retelling, but the core never changed. Margaret was the villain, and I was the one who stood tall in the end. Even those who had once doubted me now came forward, eager to align themselves with the truth. Eleanor stopped me outside the florist shop, her cheeks flushed. "I should have spoken louder when I first saw them at the law office. I should have defended you sooner. But now, if you need me to testify, I will. Everyone should know what she did. One by one, the witnesses gathered. Mrs. Henderson with her observations of Margaret driving my husband's car, Eleanor with her sighting at the law office, even a secretary from that same office, emboldened by the scandal, stepped forward to admit she'd seen Margaret hovering during the meetings, whispering in my husband's ear while he signed papers. Each piece added fuel to the fire until there was no doubt left. My children, once swayed by Margaret's poison, began to see the truth too. My son came to me late one night, his eyes heavy with guilt. "Mom," he whispered, "I believed her. I thought you were just bitter, angry. I doubted you, and I'm so sorry." His shoulders shook as he buried his face in his hands. She fooled all of us. I wrapped my arms around him, my own tears falling. "She fooled me too," I whispered. "But the truth always finds its way out." As the scandal grew, Margaret's world shrank. Friends stopped calling, neighbors turned away, invitations dried up. Where once she had strutted through town with her head high, now she walked quickly, eyes down, afraid of the whispers that followed her everywhere. The lawyer confirmed publicly that the true will was valid, and rumors swirled that the forged version might lead to legal charges. Nothing was official yet, but the community didn't need courts to deliver judgment. They had already decided. Margaret was guilty in their eyes. And her punishment was exile from the respect she had so carefully cultivated. For me, it was bittersweet. Vindication tasted sharp, like lightning. I had regained my voice, my dignity, my rightful place. But watching my own sister crumble under the weight of her lies brought no joy, only sadness. Because beneath the anger and the betrayal, she was still the girl who once held my hand in our grandmother's garden and promised, sisters forever. Forever had ended, and the whole town knew it. The days after the truth broke felt strange, almost unreal. For weeks I had been suffocating under humiliation, my voice drowned by whispers and pity. Now the air felt lighter, sharper, as if every breath was no longer weighed down by lies. But with truth comes consequence, and those consequences fell hardest on Margaret. The lawyer filed paperwork with the court, submitting the true will and flagging the forged one as suspicious. He didn't say it outright, but the word fraud hung in the air like a storm cloud. Soon officials began asking questions. Margaret was summoned for statements, her signature compared, her involvement scrutinized. She had built her scheme on careful lies, but lies crumble under the weight of law. Neighbors who once avoided me now crossed the street to greet me. "You were right all along," they said, their eyes shining with sympathy. "You fought with courage." It was a strange reversal, to go from the woman pitied and doubted to the woman praised for resilience. Yet behind every compliment, I felt the sting of what it had cost me. Dignity restored, yes, but family broken beyond repair. Margaret became a ghost in the town she once ruled. I saw her only once in those weeks, hurrying down Main Street, her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting to avoid stares. Once she would have stopped to chat, her laughter filling the air, her presence commanding. Now silence followed her like a curse. Even those who loved gossip turned away, unwilling to be caught near her shadow. My children struggled most of all. They carried guilt heavy on their shoulders, guilt for doubting me, guilt for believing her. My daughter wept when she came to me one night, clutching my hands. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I let her words poison me. I didn't protect you when you needed me most." I stroked her hair, whispering, "We were all fooled. That's what betrayal does. It blinds. But you see clearly now, and that's what matters." My son grew quieter, his eyes shadowed with anger. "I'll never forgive her," he said through clenched teeth. "She tore this family apart." But I reminded him softly, "Forgiveness is not for her. It's for us. Don't let her take more than she already has." He nodded, but I knew his heart still burned with fury. The investigation dragged on as legal matters always do, but the outcome was clear. The estate remained mine, protected under the true will. Margaret faced not only disgrace but possible charges for tampering. Rumors swirled of fines, of court battles, of debts piling up. The woman who once walked with power now lived in fear of every knock at her door. As for me, I returned to my routines, though they felt different now. The bakery down the street welcomed me again, the owner pressing an extra loaf into my bag with a smile. At church, people shook my hand, their whispers now of admiration instead of doubt. Yet every time I heard my name, I remembered the cost. Respect regained is never the same as respect never lost. Nights were the hardest. I would sit alone in my living room, the music box on the mantel glowing softly in the lamplight. Sometimes I would open it, letting its melody drift through the house. Carrying the memory of my husband's hand in mine, of the life we built together. The will he left me was more than paper. It was his final promise, his final truth, and that truth had saved me from being erased. But it had also destroyed the bond of sisterhood I once believed unbreakable. Margaret and I had shared everything once, laughter, secrets, childhood dreams. Now we shared only silence and the wreckage of betrayal. She lost her reputation, her standing, her carefully crafted mask. And I, though vindicated, lost the illusion that family always protects its own. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of gold, Mrs. Henderson visited. She sat with me on the porch, her cane resting by her chair. "You've come through fire," she said quietly, "and you're still standing. That's strength, dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I looked at her, my throat tight. "It doesn't feel like victory." She nodded. "It rarely does. Justice isn't about joy. It's about balance. And balance has been restored." Her words stayed with me. Justice had come. Yes. Margaret bore the weight of her lies, and I carried the scars of her betrayal. Balance, in its own cruel way, had been restored. When I walked through town now, people no longer whispered in pity. They nodded in respect. Some even smiled, though always with a touch of caution, as if my story had become a cautionary tale. A reminder that betrayal can lurk in the places we least expect, even in the blood that runs closest to our own. And I carried myself differently, too. Shoulders straighter, steps steadier. Not because I had won some grand prize, but because I had refused to be erased. My dignity, my legacy, my truth, they were mine again. The town eventually moved on, as towns always do. Scandals fade, whispers shift to new stories, and the world finds fresh distractions. But for me, the echoes remained. Every time I walked past Margaret's house, its shutters drawn, its garden overgrown, I was reminded of how close I had come to losing everything. Not just my home, not just the estate, but my dignity, my voice, my very place in the story of my life. And yet, I hadn't lost. Against all odds, against all the lies, I had stood tall. I hadn't let them erase me. That knowledge was my quiet victory. I rebuilt my routines, one small act at a time. In the mornings, I brewed strong coffee and sat by the window, the sunlight spilling across the floorboards. I reopened the boxes of photographs I once couldn't bear to look at. Pictures of my husband smiling, our children laughing, our family gathered at Christmas dinners before betrayal poisoned the air. They hurt to look at, but they also healed. Because even though the end of our story was tangled in lies, the years we had before were real. No one could steal that from me. The house, once heavy with grief, began to feel like home again. I planted roses in the backyard, the same kind we had planted together years ago. Their fragrance filled the evenings, a reminder that beauty can bloom again, even in soil that has been broken. My children returned to me, not with the same innocence as before, but with honesty. We spoke openly now. No more shadows, no more whispers. My daughter helped me tend the garden, her laughter returning bit by bit. My son took over the repairs my husband used to do, his presence steady, grounding. We weren't the same family as before. We were scarred, yes, but we were together. And that was enough. As for Margaret, she faded from our lives. Legal proceedings loomed, but even before the courts could decide her fate, society had already judged her. She became a figure of disgrace, her name spoken with pity and disgust. The sister I once loved was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by envy, undone by her own ambition. And though part of me still mourned that loss, the little girl who once held my hand in our grandmother's garden, I knew I couldn't carry her weight anymore. She chose her path. I chose mine. One evening, as the sun sank low, I sat alone in the living room with the old music box on my lap. I wound the key, and the melody filled the air, soft and haunting. For weeks, it had been the vessel of my pain, the hiding place of the will that saved me. Now it was something more. A symbol. Proof that even when betrayal surrounds you, truth has a way of finding its voice. I closed my eyes, listening to the music, and whispered into the quiet, "You didn't erase me. I'm still here." Because that was the final lesson. They can take your money, they can twist your family, they can drown you in lies. But dignity is something only you can surrender, and I had refused. So I ask you, the one listening now, what would you do if the person closest to you tried to erase your life? Would you surrender, let yourself be written out of your own story? Or would you fight, claw, and rise again, no matter how broken you felt? I chose to fight, and though the scars remain, though the pain lingers, I walk forward with my head high. My husband's true words, my children's renewed trust, my own voice restored, all of it is mine. The roses bloom in my garden, the house stands firm, and the music box plays on. I survived betrayal. I reclaimed my dignity, and now I live, not as the erased widow, but as the woman who refused to disappear. So if my story has reached you, if you've walked these steps with me, I ask one thing. Don't let anyone silence you. Don't let anyone take what you know is yours. And if you've ever faced betrayal, if you've ever felt erased, tell me, what did you do? Or what would you do? Share it so none of us ever feel alone in the shadows again. Because in the end, betrayal is not the last word. Truth is.